Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please allow me to begin by thanking the governments and people of Japan, Australia, the Republic of Korea, the United States, and the European Union for co-hosting this symposium, for inviting me to speak, and for standing shoulder to shoulder with human rights defenders and abductee family members who have been seeking full transparency on the part of the DPRK, striving to resolve the tragic North Korean abduction conundrum. I wish to express my heartfelt compassion and sympathy toward the family members who have been longing for their loved ones and awaiting answers for too long. The abduction of Japanese nationals and citizens of other countries is at the core of issues that represent North Korean human rights abuses. To resolve the issue, we need strong international solidarity. This is an urgent humanitarian and human rights issue. Of the parents of the confirmed 12 Japanese abductees whose cases have not been resolved, only Ms. Yokota Sakie is still with us. The other parents have sadly passed away without meeting their long-lost children or exercising their fundamental right to know the fate of their sons and daughters. It goes without saying that there may be many more surviving parents, as the possibility of North Korean abduction cannot be ruled out for an additional 871 missing Japanese nationals. Today, we are faced with an even greater challenge than before. The DPRK has aligned itself with international aggressors, exporting millions of artillery rounds, ballistic missiles, other weapons, tunneling technology and know-how, and even thousands of special forces, proliferating instability and violence in return for cash that is filling the regime's coffers. The DPRK insists that they returned all Japanese abductees who are still alive, and the others are dead or not confirmed to have entered the North Korean territory. Since the DPRK has never proved the death of those abductees beyond reasonable doubt, and in the absence of physical evidence, the North Korean argument is not convincing. Japan continues to pursue its policy toward the DPRK based on the premise that 12 confirmed abductees whose fate the DPRK has not transparently confirmed are still alive. Pursuant to the May 2014 Stockholm Agreement, the DPRK pledged to investigate the abduction of Japanese nationals. The investigation was reportedly initiated, but the DPRK unilaterally announced its cessation. To this day, the government of Japan does not agree with the cessation. A bilateral agreement leading to the resumption of that investigation could be a practical step moving forward. That said, it is hard to believe that the controlling, totalitarian DPRK regime is unaware of the fate of the Japanese and other abductees and may need an investigation. Nevertheless, Japan and the noble cause of resolving the abductee issue could benefit from increased international cooperation and coordination among like-minded democracies and even other UN member states. Is it possible to re-engage the Kim Jong-un regime on the abduction issue? After all, the abduction was ordered by Kim Jong-un's predecessor. Moreover, he's in the process of revamping North Korean ideology, discarding what used to be some of the fundamental DPRK ideological tenets, including unification under the Kim regime. It may not be as difficult as before for the DPRK leader to dissociate himself from abductions perpetrated before his time. For that reason, there is a chance that abduction could be resolved even before other pressing human rights issues and even before overwhelming military and security challenges, including North Korea's nuclear and missile program. What benefits could North Korea have? In addition to improved relations with Japan and the possible lifting of unilateral sanctions, North Korea could build some trust on the international stage, which could lead to more beneficial rounds of engagement on different topics. Targeted incentives may encourage DPRK cooperation. Humanitarian gestures should be framed not as concessions, but as reciprocal trust-building measures in a clearly defined negotiation framework. If time allows during the discussion, I would also like to touch upon the merits of involving UN member states from the global south. Coordinating among other countries impacted by abductions, and diversifying the issue into other thematic frameworks, such as human trafficking. Your Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by saying, Kume Yutaka, Matsumoto Kyoko, Yokota Megumi, Tanaka Minoru, Taguchi Aeko, Ichikawa Shuichi, Masumoto Rumiko, Soga Miyoshi, Ishoka Toru, Matsuki Kaoru, Hara Tadaki, Arimoto Kenji, you are not forgotten. We will never rest. We will have no respite until we bring full closure to you and your families. Those abductees who are still alive must return to their families and hometowns. If, heavens forbid, some of them have passed away, the DPRK authorities must provide fully transparent answers as the only way to gain international credibility and bring closure to their families. Thank you very much.
President Scarlatoiu, thank you very much. And thank you for calling on directly to the abductees. And you also gave us hope that there is the possibility that DPRK may begin to take measures against this issue. Those words were encouraging. Later on, we will engage in Q&A, but President Scarlatoiu, you touched upon the possibility of cooperation with the Global South, and that's one of the questions I intend to ask you later. For example, at UNGA in December last year, the resolution on the human rights situation and DPRK's co-sponsors, if we look at the list of co-sponsor countries, we feel that the support isn't as extensive yet. So, in order to seek progress in human rights issues of North Korea, including abduction, how can we involve the Global South, which are faced with their own human rights issues within their own countries, and what are the possibilities we can seek in order to cooperate more? President Scarlatoiu, please.
Like-minded UN member states, including the 5 co-hosts of this symposium, have pressed for DPRK human rights improvement at the United Nations. Most of these states have represented the global north. Moving forward, it will be essential to involve UN member states from the global south. Many of them have experienced tragedy and human rights violations, including enforced disappearances, and could be sympathetic to this pressing human rights issue. Moreover, countries impacted by abductions should coordinate legal and diplomatic responses. National legislation such as South Korea's Protection and Support of Missing Children Act and Japan's law on the measures to deal with the abduction issue offer models for codifying rights, support mechanisms, and state responsibilities. Harmonized legislation can increase diplomatic leverage and establish shared benchmarks for accountability. Moving forward, it will be important to diversify efforts to resolve the abduction issue, not only geographically, but also thematically, framing the issue of Japanese and other nationals abducted by North Korea within the established legal and conceptual frameworks of human trafficking, including child and sex trafficking, could offer additional avenues for international advocacy, legal redress, and pressure put on the Kim regime in addressing this long-standing issue. Considering North Korean abductions through the light of human trafficking not only underscores the criminal and inhumane nature of the abductions, but may also drive new support from global anti-trafficking mechanisms and communities. The vast majority of victims were forcibly disappeared to gain labor and other skills for the state. Some victims were used to further espionage and terrorist activities. Women abducted from Europe, the Middle East, and Africa were subjected to forced marriages with men from other countries to prevent liaisons on their part with ethnic Korean women that could result in interracial children. Some of the abducted women have also been subject to sexual exploitation. Article 3 of the Palermo Protocol to prevent, suppress, and punish trafficking in persons, especially women and children, supplementing the United Nations Convention against Transnational Organized Crime, adopted by the United Nations in 2000, defines trafficking in persons as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of the threat or use of force for the purpose of exploitation, including sexual exploitation, forced labor services, slavery, or practices similar to slavery. The stories of individuals such as Yokota Megumi, Soga Hitomi, and Romanian Doina Bumba fall within these definitions and are representative of the need to expand the conceptualization of North Korean abductions within the framework of human trafficking. Framing these abductions as trafficking crimes has practical advantages, including, first, international mechanisms. Framing these cases under the framework of human trafficking can invoke international legal frameworks and leverage reporting mechanisms such as the UNODC, the U.S. Trafficking in Persons Report, and the Office of the UN Special Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons. These bodies can be leveraged for greater advocacy and pressure. Second, moral and legal clarity, very important. While political considerations offer clout diplomatic negotiations, human trafficking is universally condemned. Presenting these cases as trafficking violations removes ambiguity and broadens the coalition of actors willing to support the victims and their families. Third, broadening the narrative is important, highlighting the experiences of non-Japanese victims such as Doina Bumba internationalizes the issue, showing it is not confined to Japan-North Korea relations, but a broader pattern of state-sponsored exploitation. As the panel discusses strategies toward the resolution of the North Korea-led abductions, integrating the frameworks of child trafficking, human trafficking, and sex trafficking could provide renewed urgency, international leverage, and legal grounding. The stories of Yokota, Soga, and Bumba are not only about abduction. They're about exploitation, coercion, and the denial of basic human dignity. Recognizing them as trafficking victims underscores the severity of North Korea's crimes and strengthens the moral imperative for immediate resolution.
President Scarlatoiu, thank you very much. International support towards the resolution of abduction has to be extended, and thank you for those tips and advice on how to do that. And President Scarlatoiu, I also wish to ask you a question.
Regarding the need to further expand the cooperation amongst the UN member countries, North Korea, for example, at the UN General Assembly high-level meeting held in May of this year, in such areas, North Korea is repeating its unilateral assertion about their position. But amongst the North Korean human rights issues, what do you think is the unique characteristic of the abduction? In order to resolve the abduction issue, I would like to ask you about your outlook or possible approaches. Of course, you already discussed about this, but I would like to ask you to further add your comments, please.
Certainly, when it comes to North Korean human rights, there is no easy solution. And yet, in order to improve human rights in North Korea, systemic, fundamental reform is needed. The issue of abductions by North Korea is an exception. What it would take would be not necessarily structural reform, but a political decision made at the very top and directives issued from the very top supposedly by the very supreme leader, to tackle, address, and resolve this issue. What the international community would do to support that effort, for example, the establishment of a UN-led contact group could be an idea, a group that could operate within a clear mandate, including time-bound goals for disclosure of abductee information, repatriation, and access for international monitors. This could be, of course, a controversial issue, but one could consider inclusion in denuclearization frameworks and also time-limited accountability mechanisms. The DPRK could be given a grace period to tackle this issue and provide some answers. If that doesn't happen, then there could be accountability mechanisms put into place, whether we're talking about ad hoc tribunals or national courts in effective countries that could consider universal jurisdiction. Of course, as mentioned earlier, humanitarian incentives, if provided, should be framed not as concessions, but as reciprocal trust-building measures. And most importantly, I do represent international civil society at this symposium. Strengthening civil society engagement will be of the essence. Civil society organizations secure the information, the documentation relevant to this issue. And over the years, these organizations have engaged in very effective outreach and advocacy.
President Scarlatoiu, thank you very much. We've already heard from the two panelists comprehensive approaches, many ideas to solve the abduction issue, but we still have some time, so I would like to ask one final question, a common question to both of you. The Japanese government, Prime Minister Ishiba, has been saying that there has to be frank discussion between the leaders and we have to squarely confront North Korea through dialogue and direct conversation. In order for us to resolve the abduction issue, what kind of approach do you think would be effective to persuade North Korea to respond to our call for dialogue? You've already hinted some clues in your responses made so far, but once again, can you share with us your thoughts regarding what approach would be possible? From the families, we've heard that they want to see the return. So they want to see the summit and they want to see the high-level consultations that would lead to a summit between the leaders. So from such perspective, what kind of approach do you think would be effective? I ask the two panelists. First, President Scarlatoiu, and then Ambassador Yun, in that order.
Thank you very much. Focus on trust building could be an effective way of tackling the issue while approaching North Korea. Of course, the focus is on North Korea's nuclear and ballistic missile program, on North Korea's proliferation of instability and violence to international aggressors and troubled regions. We also know that North Korea has breached pretty much each and every multilateral and bilateral agreement it has entered, from the NPT to the Geneva Agreed Framework of 1994 to the six-party talks to the Leap Day Agreement, and the list goes on and on. President Ronald Reagan's favorite Russian proverb, as you all remember, was trust but verify. And when it comes to North Korea, we talk about CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization, or FFVD, full, final, verifiable denuclearization. Before verification, we need trust. Addressing human rights in general, and in particular, this issue of abductions of Japanese and other foreign nationals by North Korea, could provide the DPRK to build some much needed trust that could provide a platform for engaging in negotiations and discussions on other topics as well.
President Scarlatoiu, thank you very much.